We're wondering, were you wondering what is the hardest test in life when you saw that title? What's the hardest test? When I was working on this, I was thinking to myself, I've had some hard tests in my life. And I don't mean obstacle course or anything like that. I mean like educationally. There's some really hard tests out there that can create, problems with your head. And it doesn't have to be a lawyer's state bar exam. It doesn't have to be a medical board testing, even though several of you have gone through that. It doesn't have to be what we would consider to be the oral arguments to defend a PhD submission. All of these rolled into one, I think, is what makes this the hardest test of all. And when we think about it, and when you think about it, it's probably right. It's called character. Character. Probably one of the toughest tests for us to ever pass. And it's because when you're talking about your character, you're talking about your innermost thoughts. And you kind of like have to dig down inside yourself to clarify what it is you think, what you believe. It exposes our hidden flaws. Imagine that we have flaws. It's crazy, I know. And we also know that it reveals our strengths, our determination, our willingness to step outside of our normal posture. Carol and I were talking before church this morning downstairs about this police officer who was on his way to work yesterday. And out on the ice skating were two young girls. And all of a sudden, what did he witness? Did you see this on the news? They fell through. One was close to shore. He was able to basically grab her. The other one, he dove in the water in full uniform and rescued her and swam back because the ice, they should have never been on it. But he saved both little girls' lives. And when I was reading that story last night, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, defund the police. What do they do? All they do is cause trouble. And here's two little girls that, God willing, they will grow up to be model citizens. They'll be mothers, they'll have children, and their children will have children, and they'll be model citizens, and they'll appreciate the reality of what goes on in society. Saved by a policeman. And when we look at this first chapter of Daniel, what we see is this young man, in 15, 16, he was just a teenager, who all of a sudden was taken away from all things he knew. And that is where he lived in Jerusalem. When we think about this test that he's going to be going through, we realize that Daniel's innermost strengths are going to be revealed as he is put in this situation with King Nebuchadnezzar. At that time, the most powerful man on the planet, the king of Persia, Babylon, all of this modern era stuff today that's Iraq. He conquered it all, and he conquered down to Egypt, and he conquered left and right and up and down, and he was a big deal. So when we get to chapter 1, these first couple of verses of Daniel, they start to tell us the story. And it goes like this. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, okay, remember, Judah, oh boy, John, would you get the door? The wind just blew it open. That means the bell tower is windy. Wow. That'll be interesting on the video. The door just blew open. Oh. Yeah, it's because it's not locked. Okay, thank you. So Judah is the southern part, which includes Jerusalem, okay? And the northern part of Israel is Israel. That was the way it was separated in the day. So here we see, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, small g, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God, small g. Shinar is just a word for the Babylonian plains. It would be like us saying we're going to the Midwest. Shinar is all of the plains surrounding the city of Babylon. And the vessels that he would have taken out of the temple would have been the gold instruments that were used in the worship. And so he just took some of those, and the Lord said, that's cool, and let him go. And off they go into the time of the Gentiles. The time of the Gentiles specifically has to do with who's controlling the Hebrew nation. And as Nebuchadnezzar takes the people from Babylon, from Jerusalem up to Persia into Babylon, he's basically kidnapped the Hebrew nation, a large majority of them. And they are now finding themselves as prisoners of war, so to speak, because Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah. On his way back, he made all sorts of defining acquisitions of land. One of the biggest battles he had was with the Egyptian armies at a place called Carchemish, and he annihilated them. He didn't take anybody back to Babylon from Egypt. No, he just kind of like wiped them out. But the Lord had impressed on him about Jehoiakim and the citizens in Jerusalem and Israel in general. And they all had made such a quick surrender because that's what the Lord told Jehoiakim to do, that it would save the city. And this is a major turning point in Hebrew history. When we get to the time of the Gentiles, it basically means that for the first time in history, there is no king in Judah/Jerusalem, no king in the lineage of David. And oftentimes we overlook that. I never really considered that until I read it several times, and it's like the Davidic king line stopped at the Babylonian exile. When all of those people were taken up to Babylon, now the Gentile nations would dominate the whole area that is modern Israel. And that would include Jordan, and it would include Egypt, and parts of Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon, and Iraq, and Iran. All of those had fallen under his control, meaning Nebuchadnezzar. And what we also understand, though, is that there will be a time when things will change. And according to our timeline that you have, we go from the time of the Gentiles, we will return to a time of the nation of Israel. And that'll occur in due time. But for now, what we see is this Gentile king who basically overruns Jerusalem. Now he gets all of the people there, and he wants to select some of the fine young men. These would typically be educated youth, those who are of royalty, some stature in society, and that's when we find some things happening. It's the reality that Luke tells us, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, and they will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, and the time of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. So when we look at our chart, we see this, the beginning, going into what will eventually become the time of Israel when we see them return back to Jerusalem. But that won't happen for 70 years. 70 years they're going to be in exile. They're going to be in a situation where they become, quote, semi-citizens of Babylon. And when we look at Daniel, I talked about this last week. Daniel observed some things. Now, the deportation of the nation of Israel started about 605. Daniel would have been 15-ish. So he starts having dreams and things, serving Yahweh, Jehovah God, probably when he was about 20 or so. So we start a timeline with Daniel at around 600. So he'd been there for 5 years. And Daniel makes observations. He knows there's going to be the rebuilding of Jerusalem. God has told him in a dream, Jerusalem will be rebuilt. He knows that the Gentile nations will rise and fall, meaning Babylon and Rome and Greece and all these other entities that were conquerors, they all end up being conquered, ending with the Roman Empire. He also knows about the Messiah and talks about the future time when the Lord will come. That's all happened. That's fulfilled. That's complete. Now, I was looking on LinkedIn, which is a business thing that we read, and there was a guy wrote on there something or other about the book of the Bible that was just put together to make people have something to have a hope in. That it's really a book that some author put together just because he wanted to make people feel good. And this guy's there's dyed-in-the-wool atheists and then there's dyed-in-the-wool atheists. And this guy is like, he'd be the president of the Atheist Society. And his argument about it had to do with the fact that everyone who reads the Bible ends up feeling good. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's part of the purpose of God explaining what's going on. But this guy's opinion of the Bible was, it's an artificial work that just makes people feel good. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. I mean, it only started like 2,000 years ago, Genesis, and the books of Moses. Yeah, you're probably right. Guy just sat down last week and wrote it. That's why in Jerusalem you can go to the museum that holds original documents from the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the entire book of Isaiah. That was written 700 years before Christ. There it is. Just made up stuff. The time of troubles is going to come. That's basically tribulation. The 7 years between the rapture and the millennial reign. He projects this. Now that hasn't happened yet. We don't know when it will. That's why we're in this series. Hopefully by this time next year or so, we'll have an understanding. And then the time of righteousness. That's the 1,000-year reign that Christ will look over. That comes after the 7 years of tribulation. All of us will be participants in that, one way or the other, because at the rapture, if we're dead, we'll be raised first. If we're still living, we'll be raised second. There. And we'll go to heaven with him. And then after the tribulation, we will return with Christ. Pretty cool, huh? And we'll have white robes and we'll be able to fly. Ah. So, these are things, the first three have come to pass. The last two are future events. That's what prophecy is. Foretelling events. And when we see Daniel do this, we find that he's going to have to do some things. He's got to make some choices here. Daniel faces the choice. He's given the task. And this comes to us starting in verse 3. Chapter 1, verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. So that's some stuff that's got to take place. They're going to go, and this Ashpenaz, who's this head guy, he would be like the chief supervisor of everything going on. He's got to go pick out these guys. So he goes out and he picks out a bunch of them, and the whole idea is there's going to be the cream of the crop, so to speak, taken out of all those who came from Israel, all the ones that were brought into Babylon. And a part of them were these 4 youths: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, often those 3 names, the last 3 names, aren't real familiar with us. That's their Hebrew names, and they're all related to worship of God. When we think about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, these are the 3 friends of Daniel. Now they're a part of this, what we would call, course. They're going to have to take a course. And the king ordered Ashpenaz, this head guy, and he ordered him to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank. And he appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Those are the familiar names that we know, because who went in the fiery furnace? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's what we're going to understand here a little bit later on. But Nebuchadnezzar wanted these young boys now to walk and talk and breathe and live as if they were Babylonian. So this 3-year liberal arts program that they're enrolled in is something to help them understand the Babylonian agriculture, architecture, astrology, the laws and the mathematics of the community, and then this language of the Chaldeans, which was called Akkadian, Akkadian, Akkadian. It's like a tough one. It's one of those languages now that's been lost in the archives of history. But it was one that challenged them in everything that they would do. And the whole purpose of this royal diet that Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to have was to make them strong and healthy and grow and be, excellent, wonderful-looking young men. Nebuchadnezzar had all these people surrounding him that were beautiful, whether it be his wives or his concubines or the citizenry or the officials of the court. All of them were the best looking that they could get. And he's striving here to make sure that these Hebrew young men would grow up the same way. So he says, basically, you're going to have to eat all this stuff that would be served at the king's table. It's a challenge for these folks because there's stuff involved in that menu that would defy the Lord God Jehovah. They're not supposed to eat this, drink this, do that, do this. They're not supposed to do that. And it was something that was meant to compromise their upbringing and their faith. Nebuchadnezzar was pretty shrewd. He wanted them to leave behind all things Judah, Jerusalem, Israel. He didn't want any of that to be a part of their lives. So he was determined to replace all of their values with Babylonian values and make the reality come to pass that their families, their homes, their religion, all that would be pushed aside. And an interesting sad note is that a Jewish historian, Josephus, who wrote in the 1st and 2nd centuries, Josephus basically said that he oftentimes understood that these who were a part of his court would be made eunuchs. Because one of the questions that often comes to pass is, why didn't Daniel get married and have kids? Well, a eunuch was like incapable of having kids. Yeah, involuntarily. And the final blow for these guys would have been when they took away their names, because they had God-honoring Hebrew names, and they've been replaced with pagan names that were names of Babylonian gods, small g gods. Didn't know that. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, those were all gods of the Babylon. So here's these 15-year-old boys who have come into this situation miles and miles away from home, and they're going to take college-level courses. They're going to be put into a situation where they have to learn a foreign language in order to understand the courses. They're going to be constantly barraged by pagan philosophies. This is how we do this. This is how you will do this. This is why we do this. This is why you will do this. And all of these things being impacted upon them, and there's no going home. No summer vacation. No heading to Florida for spring break. It's all the time, 24/7, they're going to be put in this situation. So how will our boys handle this? Well, I think we can say they not only handled it, they were A students, summa cum laude. How do they pass the test? They used their inner convictions. The inner convictions that they had to do with how they were raised and how they did not allow any of the stuff that was going on to erase that. There were 3 or 4 factors that would work into this. Their inner convictions and how they would seek the Lord and how they would seek guidance from not an earthly perspective. So we go to verse number 8, the first part of it. Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. Literally, Daniel, in the Hebrew, the way that would translate, set his heart on the fact that he wouldn't defile himself. I will not, I will not, I will not. You know, it's like the stubborn kid. I am not going to do that. Except he wasn't saying it out loud. This was his inner conviction. He made up his mind before any of these delicious meals could be set before him. He already had a plan. And in this privacy of his heart, he kind of built this wall that said, I will not compromise. And then what he did was he took the realities of what was going on from the scriptures he had learned at home when he was growing up, knowing that the teaching of the great prophets. He would have been exposed to Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. He would have had access to their literature, their writings, their predictions, their prophecies. He knew all this stuff, and the word of the Lord to him was unshakable. Leviticus 11:44. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. Things that swarm on the earth. in this particular case, what's swarming is the king's orders to eat this stuff and drink this stuff. And Daniel's like, I don't think so. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's that time where when he says to himself, I might be living in an unclean world, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be unclean. I might be surrounded by sinners. That doesn't mean I have to join them. It's this approach he takes, a wise approach. He made this resolution, and now he does something that's really unique. He talks to the commander of the officials. He seeks an agreement with his supervisor. Now, at this point, he's not just the commander of the officials, he's like the dean of the college. He's in charge of everything, all the stuff that's going on. Daniel knows that he has to be in a position where he can exercise wisdom and not present himself in some manner that's trying to outthink or outsmart the commander. He has to make sure that he's passionate about it, but he doesn't put himself in an awkward position of defilement. So he listens. He listens to stuff that's going on. Daniel 1:10, and the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. Let me stop there. So Daniel's talking to the boss, the dean of the college. And he's like, we can't eat that food. It's what we'd really like to do is have a different diet. Something that is more compatible with our digestive system. Vegetables and water. And the guy's like, wait a minute. If I give you that, you're not going to look as good as all the rest. Now remember, they're just 4 out of we don't know how many. They got a whole flock of guys in this classroom. So there may be 18, 20, 30, we don't know. But the boss, the dean, says, I can't let you do that because you're going to look different than the other guys. They're all going to look healthy and strong, and you're going to look meager and weak. Off with my head if I do that. Oh my goodness. Here's Daniel. Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given some vegetables and water to drink. 10 days. 10 days is a pretty long time to be on a veggie diet. Vegan diet, right? Then let our appearance be observed in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So basically, he's kind of put a challenge out there. Daniel lets his convictions speak loudly to the commander, and he respected the commander's situation because he didn't want the commander to lose his head. So he says, just give us 10 days. Give us 10 days. King doesn't need to know. Just give us 10 days. And then you look at us and you look at the others and tell us what you think. And the reality that happens is we find them gaining some divine assistance. Some divine assistance. From the very beginning of the first letter in Daniel, verse 1, chapter 1, God has been like directing this whole thing behind the scenes. He's there on the sidelines, and he's doing this, he's doing that, he's doing this, he's doing that. And he's keeping everything on track for what Daniel in his lifetime will exhibit on behalf of Jehovah. Nothing is being shortchanged. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hand. We know that. And inside the commander's heart, we see maybe the Lord softening the commander's heart towards Daniel. He did it to the king of Judah. He's probably done it now to the commander. Verse 9, now God granted Daniel favor and compassion. Those two go hand in hand. Favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. That's a pretty amazing statement because later in the story, the Lord becomes like a private tutor to these youth, to the 4 young men that are the keys to our story. Proverbs 16:7, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. The commander becomes Daniel's best friend. Is that crazy or what? Here he is, feeding them vegetables and water. Everything's going along fine according to plan, and they're buddies now. And the way that all of this unfolds is something that we're going to learn about as we go through the whole chapter. But we know in verse 15, at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed worse. No, their appearance seemed better. And they were fatter than all the youths that had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine that they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables, parenthetically, and water. They looked better than the guys that were eating, steak and baked potatoes and turkey and peas and all that stuff. They're rocking it. And the reality for what happens here is we now understand that Daniel stood by his basic principles the whole time, and surely he trusted his God. None of this could have happened without that reality. We jump to verse number 18. Then at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them. This would have been after the 3-year course was done. They graduated, they got their degrees, summa cum laude. The king had specified for presenting them. The commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. So we summarize here. They're in this class, 15, 20, 30 students, we don't know. They're the odd guys, and all of a sudden, they become the best of the best of the best. They would have made the top 4 in whatever it was they were doing. Verse 20, as for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the 1st year of Cyrus the king. Basically what that's telling us is when he was in position to express exactly all that he knew, and we'll learn all about that in the coming chapters, he was wiser than all of the wise men that Nebuchadnezzar had used as his consultants. This is where the Magi came from in the Christmas story. They came from Babylon. And these guys were the smartest. They read the stars and all that, and they were fortune tellers, and we'll learn all about that in a little bit. But the reality for what we see going on here is Daniel stayed in the service of the king no matter who the king was. And there's several that we'll go through. In Hebrew means God's chosen. He's the king who said, okay, you guys pack up and go back to Jerusalem. God told me to tell you guys you can leave now. And off they go to rebuild the wall. And all of this takes place because we're reviewing what it takes with Daniel to have arrived at this place in his life. So, our lesson today would be, first of all, we know that he had to rely on inner, and it's conviction, spelling error on your outlines there. Inner conviction can overcome outer pressure. When you in your life know that you know that you know something is right, unquestionably, you know that, and you cannot be swayed away from that, that's inner conviction. I mean, we know that we know that we know that it's going to be really hard for the Browns to ever win a Super Bowl. We know that. We know that we know that we know. That's inner conviction. It might not be a desired outcome, but it's something that we know is true right now. For us and for Daniel, he had all of this stuff arranged in his mind about the right way to live and do things and breathe and honor God. And that's where we get to the second thing. God-honoring convictions yields God-given rewards. God-given rewards. Daniel had no real power over his circumstances or the people around him. I mean, it's not like he hypnotized everybody and said, think I'm great. No, he didn't do that. That wasn't how it worked. He did everything based on the greatest power he had, and that was the influence of his God. And knowing that within this small circle of control that he had, along with his three brethren, we realize that they honored God in their minds and in their bodies and in their actions. All of these things they handled properly, and they honored him. And then they just let the Lord take care of things. And the reality for them was his superiors in Babylon, his education, his health, all these rewards that he got in life. Daniel was there from the beginning to the end of the exile, from 605 to about 530. You know, that's the 70-odd years. That's the reality of Daniel being an integral part of what in that time frame made Babylon great. Because we'll find out he not only got Nebuchadnezzar to celebrate Yahweh, he also got the other kings that would follow him to do the same thing. Until along comes Cyrus, who was basically, he was the king of the Persian Empire outside of Babylon. He came in and conquered Babylon and took it over, and he was God's chosen, as his name would signify, and he made everything very good for the Hebrew people. And all of that, we think about it and we realize we may be wise like Daniel, and if we do that, we can live as faithfully. We can live as faithfully. We may not know what it was like to live in Babylon in those times. Every day to be confronted with idols and small g gods and all the things that surround that, the things that power controlled and purchased. But we also realize that there is a God in heaven who has a plan, and that plan was unfolding even at 605 BC. And today it's still unfolding. So we're going to read Daniel verse 17, the first part, chapter 1. So book, chapter, verse, ready? Daniel 1, 17a. God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. And that's what his word is here for us today. Amen?